Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast again, and today we're sitting down and chatting with Kate Wood, who is a friend and a colleague and doing some really cool work that I think everybody should take a look at in a couple different sectors, and we're going to talk about all of that. But Kate is coming to us as the principal of Worth Preserving, where she serves as a historic rehabilitation strategist. And we're going to be talking all about the work that she does in the field and what Worth Preserving is up to and how you can follow that work. But before we get there, we love to get to know people and understand what they do and what led them to that line of work. So, Kate, where did you grow up and what kind of set you off on this career into historic preservation?
Well, Nick, first of all, just let me say thank you so much for having me on PreserveCast. I'm a huge fan of you and the show and Preservation Maryland. So, the guests that you've had, I have binged on all of your episodes. So it's great company to be in. So thank you so much for bringing me on. So I always say that I grew up in New Jersey in a 1927 Tudor revival house that my parents bought when I was 10 years old. Before that, I lived in Texas and in a very undistinguished 1960s ranch. But I really, my imagination came alive when, those formative years growing up in New Jersey, in that house, in that neighborhood. And it was a house that had been lived in by a couple of other families before us, but it was a fixer-upper when we bought it. And my parents really poured themselves into it and gave us all paintbrushes and made us help out in the afternoons and weekends. And we made a lot of interesting choices with that house. It needed a lot of work, but there was a lot of wall-to-wall carpet that was installed. There was a lot of woodwork that was painted. And so in some ways, I feel like my preservation career has been doing some penance for the work that we did on that house. So that was my first kind of introduction to life in an old house.
So you go from life in an old house and I keep saying on the show that we should kind of create a pie chart of how people were, first had that catalytic moment or the spark was set. And because so often it's early young experience with parents, either dragging them to historic sites or living in a historic place seems to be a big commonality. There's some standouts from that, but it's a very similar story to many people, which we always remind people is why it's important to take a young person to a historic place or talk to them about history, because it has a big impact.
Well, it definitely did in our case. My parents were both educators. And so family vacations were always, driving across country in our Volkswagen bus and camping in national parks, going to presidential libraries, going to historic houses and, outdoor museums and all of that. So it definitely rubbed off. My older brother is an architect and my younger brother is a park ranger. So we run the gamut from architecture to preservation to conservation. So it was a good investment on my parents' part.
You guys are literally, as I was thinking of it, and then it even added to it, you're like the Partridge Family of preservation. You
Totally.
even had the bus.
Absolutely.
And there's a reference if that some people may not get, so you have to look it up. Let's see here. So you go from this interest to how does it become like a career? So you go to school for it. Where's the first job in the field?
Well, so I always thought when I was, 14, 15, that I would be a star on Broadway. That was my goal. So the change came when I was about 17 years old, and I opened up a magazine. I think it was Newsweek magazine, and there was an architectural elevation of Lyndhurst. So it was an ad for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And I was just like, oh my God, that is the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. And what is this thing called historic preservation? And it just suddenly clicked. It made sense to me. Oh, this is what I've been doing. These are the places that we love to go as a family. This is what intrigues me. This is what inspires me about the place that I live. So after that, I just sort of went, full on, just decided that I was going to be a preservationist, and figured out what that meant. I became a member of the National Trust at age 17. And when I applied to college, I went to school in Virginia, which obviously is a very historical place. I majored in archaeology and anthropology. That was sort of the closest I could get to an undergraduate degree in historic preservation. And I set my sights on going to Columbia University and doing the historic preservation program there. So I went from Washington and Lee University to a 2-year stint working in the American Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art because I loved New York City and I knew I wanted to live in New York City and I knew I wanted to go to Columbia. And so that's where I ended up. I actually ended up doing a 3-year program because I decided to add urban planning to the degrees. I did a joint degree with preservation and urban planning because I felt like, if we want to implement preservation, if we actually want to make it happen in the real world, we need to understand the laws, the policies, the politics, just bringing people together to advocate for historic sites. And that's what I got really excited about. And so that became my first career in historic preservation, was doing community advocacy in New York City for landmarks and historic districts.
So, well, first off, it was whoever placed that ad for the National Trust. Good work, because you got a good return on that investment. We probably, who knows, maybe we've interviewed that person. And and then what was the organization you were working for in New York?
It was a group called Landmark West, which was a very small organization. We always said that we punched above our weight because we did historic preservation advocacy for the Upper West Side, which is a vast area, larger than most historic cities, but over 3,000 landmarks in that neighborhood. And so we were the self-appointed representatives in the community for preservation. We didn't own property. We weren't part of government, but we spoke on behalf of the landmarks and the people who cared about landmarks in the community.
So take us on the jump from that work to the work that you're doing today, and then we'll kind of jump into worth preserving and what that looks like.
Well, I always think of what I do as a form of advocacy. I am doing it on behalf of a lot of homeowners now, but I'm still working to raise awareness and appreciation for historic buildings, buildings that have character, places that have character and meaning. And so, I was the president of Landmark West for, in various titles, but really the leader of the organization for nearly 20 years. And you know what it's like to run a nonprofit, and it's a 24/7 commitment. And so I felt like I had done a lot. I had made it can feel very thankless during the process because in advocacy you lose more than you win, but you have to keep trying. And so, after almost 20 years of doing that, I decided that it was time for somebody else to take up that mantle. And I was also very excited about the work that I was doing in the Hudson Valley in New York, where my husband and I had purchased an old house that had been abandoned. And we, just but it was like a time capsule. It was like nobody had ever changed the windows, nobody had ever changed the doorknobs. I mean, everything was intact. Nobody had ever had money to do it. I mean, it's a very modest house, but we threw ourselves into that, every weekend driving up from the city, and never thought of ourselves as people who would have a weekend house, but it was just such a magical place and such a great community in the Hudson Valley that eventually, when I felt like it was time to move on from Landmark West, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to help people do what I did with our house. And, taking what I've learned from my years in advocacy and also just the hands-on part, which is really, where my heart is. I really love working with the trades. I really love, touching buildings. And there's nothing that excites me more than a completely derelict building that I can see the potential of. So that's what gave me the courage to take the leap from nonprofit advocacy or nonprofit organization to my own business.
Yeah, it's funny. Like people will often, and I'm sure you have this experience too. You go out to a site and they're like, do you want to go in? It's in really bad shape. And I'm like, yeah, that's the one I want to see. I actually, I'm not all that interested in seeing the one that's perfectly redone. Take me into the one where you can see all of its layers.
Well, it's funny
So
because I also I have a real estate license, so people come to me when they are looking for, the fixer upper, and I will take them to houses that I'm very excited about, and I can tell within 2 seconds if they're cut out for it. Some people say that, oh yeah, I want like an old house that I can fix up, and then we walk in and the plaster's, falling off, and it smells like mouse pee, and all of that, and they're like, oh no, 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 this is not what I had in mind. You know, and that's fine. Some people are really, when they say that they want to fix up a house, they want to do kitchens, bathrooms, that kind of thing, and that's great. But yeah, I really like those houses that just need everything.
yeah, we've worked at Preservation Maryland on a house that literally had been hit by a car. So
Wow,
we've
I
run the
haven't seen that
gamut.
yet.
Yeah, well, give us a call when you find that one. We'll give you some tricks. So so yeah, we've talked to a lot of different people who consult on preservation in different ways. I'm not sure. I'd have to think back, but I can't remember having spoken with someone who does residential consulting, which I think is like it takes a different breed to do that, right? And there are different people who do, commercial versus residential architecture. On the residential side, there's a lot of hand holding, but obviously you enjoy that. So talk to us about the kind of rehabilitation work that you support and what it takes. Like what if somebody were thinking about doing something like this, what should they be prepared for?
Well, I think that's interesting that you point that out about the residential consulting, because it's something that you kind of have to step back and say, and question, what's out there already. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what am I? Like, what role do I play in this process? I don't, I don't know. I don't have all of the trade skills, although I spent a lot of time, watching and learning and doing. I'm not a general contractor. I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. And so, through process of elimination, I kind of figured out, okay, well, I help people come up with the strategy. It's not, I am designing a little bit, but it's more kind of just even, it's almost like a phase zero. It's like you walk in the house and you figure out what is the significance of this place, what are its character defining features, um, what is truly special, what, maybe there's some potential for change, because historic rehabilitation is, different from, a museum restoration, for example, where you want to take it back to a specific time or, really closely match what it was when it was related to a certain person, or renovation, which is more, open-ended. Like you could do almost anything with a renovation. Rehabilitation is that sweet spot in the middle, where you're taking what's, it's where the name of my company comes from. What's worth preserving? Where do you need to change in order to make things functional in the 21st century? And then giving people permission to figure that out, because there are a lot of different ways to do it. And to be that person who helps them figure out what's right for them, what's right for this place, that's the lane that I'm, finding is just really fulfilling for me and my clients. And I hope for all the other players that we're working with, the design professionals, the trades, we just, I hope, I'm sort of that glue that holds the team together and keeps the lines of communication open. And, the direction we're all pulling in is to make, bring this 100, 200-year-old house into the present and hopefully lay the groundwork for it to survive forever.
So I think one of the interesting things about your work and the way that you market it too is that in some ways you're almost like a micro influencer or a social media influencer. I don't know. I don't know what the categories are. I don't know if you go from I don't know how many followers. I haven't checked how you have, but you're not in the multi-millions, but you definitely have a following and people who are interested in this. And I say micro in the best way, in that you're having this intimate conversation with your followers and talking to people about the different aspects of this. And I have to imagine that is a way of generating business interest too. People find you and they're like, oh, cool. She can help me bring order to this mess that I've gotten myself into. So talk to us a little bit about that. What was the decision behind kind of diving into social media? Because regardless of the scale of the influencing, you have to kind of put a lot of yourself out there. Did that feel comfortable to do? Or have you just embraced that? And what kind of a commitment is that to make that work? What kind of time commitment do you put into that?
Well, I did want to be a Broadway star, so I guess this is, that part of me is coming out now. It was difficult. I'm not a natural at social media. I do have help with it because, left to my own devices, I kind of put my blinders on and I just, I'm working and, I'm not really thinking about, let's explain this to the world. But, that advocate part of me also, recognizes that it's important that you can't just assume that everybody's on the same page. And I mean, social media is just such a wonderful way to find community. And I think that that's something that we as preservationists, it's such a great tool for us. And to speak not just among ourselves, but to as broad an audience as we can, because I think that I try to put things in a way that people can see themselves in it. And I think that, it all comes back to why. Why do we preserve? It's not because, we're antiquarians or we have, lots of opinions about design or, the way things ought to be. It's no, it's preservation is about connection, and it's about people, and it's about, places. So it's all of those things. And I think social media has just been a great way to find, it's just amazing to me when people comment. I mean, there's such substantive things that come out. And then I've started offering Wednesday office hours so that people can sign up for 15 minutes just to chat, which for me it's so much fun because people have these thought-provoking questions and these issues that are just, exciting. And then sometimes, yes, they do turn into business because people realize they, they like me, and they, we get along, and we have, I have things that I could bring to the table to help them make better decisions with their projects. So, it's like, that's the idea. Yes, it's an investment to work with a preservation consultant, but the idea is that it pays off because you make fewer mistakes along the way. And we all know that it's so easy to make mistakes because you can't possibly anticipate all of the issues that are going to come up. So to have somebody who has your back, who can hold your hand, who can say, not freak out, like these things we've seen this before, or I haven't seen this before, but I know somebody I can call, so I think people, really enjoy getting to be part of a network of people who are very serious and dedicated and passionate about preservation. Because yes, people come to it from all places, and so it's just been fun to get to know people through this common passion.
Yeah, and I feel like whoever you've hired has done a good job of kind of making you come through, because I feel like the content is really compelling and it's very personal. It's because there are a lot of preservation consultants and contractors and people out there and churning out a lot of content. And some of it feels very sterile, like they just took, the National Register for Historic Places and chopped it up into Instagram slides. And you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. But yours comes across as very personable, very warm. And I feel like there's a lot. And I was telling Kate this before we hit record, like, I feel like first off, I feel like she's become like a one-person preservation organization. And I also think that there's a lot of value in the kind of content that you're posting, and that preservation groups around the country should look at it as like a way of sort of approaching different audiences about how to tell their story. I know I've looked at it and thought like, how could we try and do a little bit better job with the way we talk about preservation and talk to homeowners about preservation? And there's so many different audiences. It's tough for a statewide preservation group like us to talk to everybody all at once. And you almost have to have different channels, but I think you've done an amazing job with that. And I think people should take a look at it, particularly the new stuff that you're doing around historic tax credits. That's how when you reached out to us to talk about something else, I was like, we really need to get her on, because I want people to take a look at that and see the way you're doing that, because it's very approachable. So this is a long way of saying you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And I'm curious,
praise from you.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, what was the thought process behind some of that kind of stuff about making it approachable? How have you do you just have somebody great working for you? Are you kind of involved in that conversation too? Because it's a different style of content than we see elsewhere.
That is very interesting perspective to have, because I don't live on social media. I spend very little time on social media myself. I have certain people that I follow and I really like to engage with. But I do have people working with me who, live and breathe, and they will bring good perspective to, what is going to be an effective way to communicate. The thing that they have, we work very closely together on content, and it's very important to me that no matter what, I don't want to just be the person who's out there going like 5 tips to do, whatever. I want people to really feel like I'm here as a resource. And the thing that they have mostly pushed me to do is have my face up there and do reels and talk, because it's, again, it's I love nothing better than a day of just painting shutters or writing a blog post or, just walking through a house with clients. Sitting down to record something is, it's sort of like I have to be encouraged and pushed to, Kate, you need to talk to people in a not just a one-on-one way. And so I'm getting more comfortable with that. And so, yeah, I give them a lot of credit for, setting me up for success when it comes to that.
Yeah, well, they're doing great work. Don't let them listen to this. We don't want them to charge you too much. So we don't want them to raise the rates.
Penny, so.
Let's see here. Well, where are you headed next? Any other projects on the horizon you want to chat about, or things you're hoping to accomplish in the future?
Well, yes. I mean, so a big project that I'm working on right now, which I have a feeling is going to be ongoing for a number of years, is a historic train depot in Copake, New York, which is sort of between the Hudson River and the Berkshires in the eastern part of the state. And it was built in the 1870s. It's been abandoned since the 1930s. I mean, talk about preservation challenge. And I'm used to projects where we have to do everything, but usually there's something already there. In this case, there's no well, there's no electricity. We just brought electricity to the site a few months ago. This is a great client who bought this property as a passion project, and we've gone through every regulatory process, every permit under the sun, but we're also doing a commercial tax credit project, so both federal and New York State tax credits to turn this into an income producing residential building. So that's very exciting. And, it's always great when I get to work with somebody who, is brave and committed like that. On the sort of using another part of my brain, and this is something that you and I have talked about, is going back to this idea of education. It's very important to me. I think that projects are so much easier when everybody has a base of knowledge that is, there's a basic understanding of what preservation is, and preservation is in many, in my projects, preservation is always rehabbing old windows. It's not replacing them with modern windows. So sort of some understanding of preservation principles. And I know that, there's a lot of information out there that people have access to. I mean, unprecedented amounts of information that's out there by YouTube, blog posts, all kinds of things where, you can get tips and how-to advice on how to take care of your old house. But I am trying to put together something that is a curriculum and something that's very organized and accessible to anyone who has responsibility for the stewardship of an old house. And, I went looking for something that I couldn't find, and I couldn't find that kind of basic information. I have it from my grad school days, but not everybody who owns an old house should have to get a master's degree in order to take care of it. So that's something that I also intend to be working on for the next, probably the rest of my life, is compiling this online curriculum of information that helps people be good stewards. And, and then they will be better clients, I think, and better partners to trades, to designers, to preservation groups who need their support. And so I think, really what I'm aiming for is culture change. I mean, really where, we live in a world where people understand the value of old houses and where they know how to take care of them.
So just a small little side project that you're just some culture shift.
Something I do on nights and weekends.
Yeah, just changing the culture of the country from throwing things out to restoring things. But, well, when that titanic and super exciting project formally launches, expect to come back here and talk to us about it, and so people can come and learn more about it, because it's super exciting. It's clearly needed. Like, we need instruction and education around so many different aspects of this, and we're deeply invested in the trade side, but as you said, making better consumers and homeowners is critically important too. So that's super exciting work. The one question we always ask people before they go, their favorite historic place or site. And I also feel like for some reason I'm being called to ask you your favorite musical as well.
Oh, my Broadway days are sadly long behind me. It's been a long time since I've been in a theater, although I do have tickets to go see the Radio City Christmas Spectacular with my 12-year-old son next week. So that is a place so Radio City is, one of my favorite places. And he has confessed to me, Mom, I really prefer modern. Old houses, not too sure about those. Modern, I like modern. So I'm hoping that Art Deco is going to be modern enough for him. But I do like modern places too. I have to say, sentimental favorite historic place is the bar in the grill room at the Four Seasons, the old Four Seasons restaurant in New York City. The bar is where my husband proposed to me 25 years ago. So we still like to go there and get a drink together, even though, it's changed somewhat. But it is a landmark interior. So the design has not changed dramatically. But I think, it's amazing to me that places like that, and Radio City for that matter, I mean, there was a time when Radio City was going to be gutted because it was considered obsolete and old-fashioned, and who they were going to carve it up into like movie theaters or something like that. And thank God they didn't, and that there were preservation advocates who stopped that from happening. But I think it's great to have these places that give you perspective on that, and it's always that long view. Preservationists are accused of being too focused on the past. We're really focused on the future. So places like that remind me that that's true.
That's like the perfect way to cap that. If your social media folks are listening, there's the clip to cut and use, because that is a perfect ending to a conversation. Kate, it's always fun to chat with you. Your perspectives on preservation are insightful, and it's really helpful to think about preservation from the perspective of the homeowner. And I think you put that front and center in the way that you carry your work. And so thanks so much for joining us today. This is great, and we'll have you back in the future to talk about that big project that's coming.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.